Well, good morning. My name is Joel. I get to be the pastor here. Welcome. Like Luke mentioned a few minutes ago, today's Palm Sunday. But if you've been around for like a month, you know that we already kind of celebrated Palm Sunday. And I don't know if that's technically allowed in church to do that a month early, but we did it. And God will forgive me if that's a sin. And what we said, though, is let's take Holy Week and let's stretch it out and make it Holy Month or Holy 5 or 6 weeks, because I wanted us to sit in it, and I wanted us to anticipate Easter for a little bit longer than a few days. I didn't want Easter to be a day. I want it to be a season for us. I know that many of you have joined us on the 21 days of prayer and fasting leading up to Easter, and I hope that in some way that has been impactful for you as you have leaned into spending time with the Lord. On March 8th, what was that, 4 weeks ago? We talked about Palm Sunday. And I tried to hit home the mania that would have surrounded Jesus when he rode into Jerusalem on the donkey. And then the next week after that, we had a conversation about Jesus and how he felt about what he saw in the temple and the emotions that rose up inside of him, the righteous anger that the house of God had become a den of robbers. And then last week we talked about the last public teachings of Jesus on what's commonly known as either Holy Tuesday or Teaching Tuesday. Do you know the nickname of the Wednesday of Holy Week? Today we're talking about Wednesday and Thursday today. Of course, Good Friday we will spend together this Friday, and then Easter Sunday concludes the series. Do you know what happens on Wednesday and Thursday, or do you know the nicknames of these two special days during Holy Week? The Bible actually doesn't tell us anything that Jesus did on Wednesday. On Sunday night, Monday night, and Tuesday night, the Bible tells us that Jesus would withdraw from Jerusalem and he would take the 1.5 mile trip out to the city called Bethlehem. He would stay the night at Lazarus' house. But there's nothing in the Bible, in any of the four gospel accounts, that say that Jesus did anything on Wednesday. It's why a lot of people call it Silent Wednesday. Jesus would go out there, he would spend the night with his 12 disciples. One of the disciples did something very significant on this Silent Wednesday. Do you know which one it was? His name was Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, the one whose name is synonymous with the word traitor. What Judas did on Silent Wednesday goes down as a famous story in the Bible. You see, on that Tuesday night, while Jesus and his disciples were having dinner at a man named Simon's house, a woman came in and poured a very expensive bottle of perfume on Jesus' head. And Jesus saw it as her anointing him for burial, because he knew what was coming a couple of days later. And he had been laying down crumbs, and the disciples just can't pick him up. They can't put this story together. They can't believe that Jesus really is going to die. They almost don't believe him. They can't wrap their minds around that happening. And the disciples, it says in the story that they were indignant. And I had to look that word up because I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. They were stunned and appalled at seemingly the waste of money that this woman had just poured all this perfume on Jesus' head. It says that all the disciples were mad, but one of them was the most mad, and it was Judas. This is what it says about Judas in John 12, about this woman's act. Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Judas wanted a piece of it. He wanted to skim a little bit off the top. He didn't care about the poor. And it seems like this incident on Tuesday night in some way was the straw that broke the camel's back. The scholars agree that Judas was the one of the 12 disciples that wanted Jesus to raise up an army and be a political Messiah the most. Scholars, biblical theologian, people smarter than me, a lot of them agree that Judas he was joining Team Jesus because he thought Team Jesus was going to win publicly, that Jesus was going to come and overthrow Rome, lead the revolution. And Judas wanted a piece of that, but when Jesus is out with his disciples, even during this week, he's going, guys, listen, if you're gonna follow me, I'm gonna die and people are gonna hate you. And Judas is like, that isn't what I was signing up for. I was excited to follow you when 100,000 people were cheering you on a couple of days ago. But people are gonna hate me? So Judas sneaks out of Bethany and walks into Jerusalem on that silent Wednesday. He made his way down that 1.5 mile bumpy dirt road and was intent on going straight to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. He has an offer that will be of great interest to the most powerful Jewish man in the world. People know that Judas is a disciple of Jesus, and so in a lot of ways, Judas has taken a risk here. By knocking on the front door of Caiaphas' house, he is risking his own arrest. He's not real sure if an unclean Jewish man like Judas is going to be even let into Caiaphas' house this close to the Passover. A lot of the Passover preparations have already been made at Caiaphas' house. They've already cleaned everything. It's an important Jewish holiday. People would prepare for weeks for this. Judas is risking this. But he tells Caiaphas' guards his business, and he isn't arrested. He's led in to meet with Caiaphas and the other priests and the elders. And Judas, one of Jesus' 12 key men, walks into the room and says, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver Jesus over to you? What are you willing to give me?" And they replied, 30 silver coins, and they counted them out, and they paid Judas in advance because they didn't want to allow Judas to change his mind later. It says that they paid him 30 silver coins, which was the equivalent of 4 months' wages. In today's terms, I don't know how much you make, but I looked up the average income of Gehenna. It's about $100,000. And so this would mean that these guys offered between $40,000 and $45,000 for Judas to betray Jesus. And at first you might be like, yeah, that's a chunk of change. But listen to this. In the book of Exodus, 30 silver coins was the going rate for a slave. And if your slave was insured and your slave died, that's how much the insurance company would pay you. In other words, it carried a low sense of valuation for human life, which actually adds to the symbolic weight of this story. Judas here, he is playing the odds, because if he betrays Jesus, one of two things is going to happen. Either one, Jesus is going to be arrested, but then reveal that he is the Messiah. And of course, if he is the Messiah, well, he's clearly going to be able to get out of this predicament with Caiaphas and the elders. Or Jesus isn't the Messiah. Judas doesn't want to follow him anyways, and Jesus is going to die. But in either case, Judas, his life will be spared. And Matthew 26 says that from then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand Jesus over. And so Judas sneaks back into Bethany. He's all by himself. Sneaks back into Bethany, has to hide the money. That's not something that he would be able to explain to the disciples. They've asked him, how'd you get 40 grand worth of money? He's got to make up a story about where he was that day. I don't know if the disciples on that Wednesday when they were in Bethany were asking one another, where's Judas at? He comes back, makes up a story. Apparently they believed him. This all happened on Silent Wednesday. Well, Thursday morning, this is what's known as Maundy Thursday, and that word Maundy comes from the word mandatum, which is where we get the word mandate, because on this Thursday, Jesus is going to mandate, he's going to command that Christians love and serve one another. And he's going to do it with a few visual illustrations here. That's why we call it Maundy Thursday. They woke up. The entire city of Jerusalem is in an anxious frenzy getting ready for the Passover. An unblemished lamb must be purchased for the Passover feast. Every home must be clean. There can't be one trace of leaven in your house. And so people are boiling their pots and they're boiling their silverware and they're sweeping the floors and they're wiping the counters. And the tradition was that the man of the house would walk through with a lantern at the end of the day, right before Passover, and just see if there was any trace of leaven in the house before the house could be determined as clean and ready for Passover. This is what people are doing on this day. And Jesus wanted to spend that Thursday night sharing the Passover meal with his disciples in Jerusalem, because this is the moment where Jesus is going to define his life for his friends. 3 years of teaching. These guys have been following Jesus. And it's this night that Jesus is going to define his life in front of them. And Judas is obviously watching Jesus with a quiet intensity, trying to get the details of what's going to happen tonight, because I've got to let Caiaphas know where Jesus is. In the late afternoon, Jesus and his disciples start traveling into Jerusalem. They find their way. A kind friend offers the upper room of his house. There's a table there. The table's only 18 inches high. They sit on pillows, not chairs. If you've ever done that, it's pretty tough. But this is how they shared the Passover meal together. And Jesus actually starts this Passover meal by washing everybody's feet. Peter's feet, John's feet, Andrew's feet, Judas's feet. Jesus goes down the line, man after man after man, and washes their feet. There could have been other people in the room. The Bible doesn't say that there were or there weren't, but because the Bible doesn't say that there were, I believe that this was a private meal for Jesus and his 12 disciples. And Jesus washes their feet. And man, they've just got to be thinking, we are in the VIP room. Like, we are in the green room here with Jesus, the guy who rode in on the donkey 4 days ago. Hundreds of thousands of people in Jerusalem, they would be killing to be in the room where they are at. And the disciples are in there having this Passover meal with Jesus, their leader. And then Jesus throws a real curveball at them. It says that Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, "Very truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me." One of you is going to betray me. It's just a right hook, seemingly out of nowhere. And the disciples are speechless. They start looking at each other going, what is Jesus talking about? And each one of them, it says, asks, "Lord, is it me? Lord, is it me?" The account from John, who oftentimes describes himself in his book as the disciple whom Jesus loved, which at first glance is like, geez, John, like patting yourself on the back here a little bit. But I think we would be well served from time to time to view ourselves as people that Jesus loved. He says that he was sitting next to Jesus when he said that. When Jesus said, "One of you is going to betray me," John says, I was sitting right next to him. And next to me was Peter. And Peter leaned over to John and said, John, ask Jesus who he's talking about. And so John leans over to Jesus and said, "Lord, who is it?" And Jesus says, "It's the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." And Jesus took a piece of bread and he dipped it in the dish and he gave it to Judas. And I don't know if there were other conversations going on at the same time. Somehow this iconic moment flew over the heads of most of the disciples. They didn't pick up exactly what was going on, because after Jesus handed it to Judas, he said, "Judas, whatever you're going to do now, do it quickly." And Judas got up from the table and walked down the stairs and walked out heading towards Caiaphas' house, and the other disciples, they don't really know what just happened. Did Jesus just kick Judas out of the band? Did Judas forget that we were hungry and thirsty, and so did he just go get us more food and drink? Did Judas, the treasurer, the guy that's supposed to keep all the money, did Jesus just go tell him to give money away to those poor people we saw when we were walking in to dinner? They don't exactly know why Judas got up and left, but Judas heads straight for Caiaphas' house to tell them where Jesus is and what Jesus is going to do that night. Judas knew that oftentimes Jesus would go to this place called Gethsemane on the Mount of Olives, and that's exactly where Jesus and the disciples go. It says they sang a song while they were in the upper room, and then they walked down the stairs and they walked out to Gethsemane, this hill. I mean, I've actually been there, and I'm so thankful that I can even visualize this. It's this whole hillside that's full of olive trees. And Jesus went to Gethsemane, and it is on this night, on this hill, that Jesus went. And he said, disciples, why don't you guys hang back here? He let a few disciples actually go a little further, but then he stopped them too. And then Jesus went on to pray. And on 3 separate occasions, Jesus walked back to them, and they couldn't even keep their eyes open. They fell asleep. And Jesus would go again and pray. He'd come back and they fell asleep. This is the night, this was the place that Jesus said, Father, if there's any other way to do this, I will take it. But if this is what it takes, if I have to die for the sins of these people, if this is how it has to go, I'm willing. And it was on this night, in this very place, that Jesus experienced what's called hematidrosis, which is a condition where people sweat drops of blood brought on by intense emotions. After Jesus is done praying, he gets with his disciples, and he's literally standing there on the side of the Mount of Olives in Gethsemane. And he looks across the Kidron Valley, and he sees a whole horde of torches. It's Judas and a bunch of guards that have been sent by Caiaphas' house to go and arrest Jesus. And they're coming down the other side, and they're coming through the valley, and they're coming up towards the disciples and up towards Jesus. Of course, any other person would have run. But Jesus just stood right there. And Judas walked up with a whole, it said they had clubs and swords and torches. And Judas had this prearranged signal. I'm going to kiss Jesus. When we get up and there's a lot of people there, and you guys, it's going to be crazy. There's going to be people running. People aren't going to be sure what's going on. I'm going to walk up, and I'm actually going to kiss Jesus of Nazareth. And so he goes up and he says, greetings, Rabbi. And he kisses Jesus. And the guards come up behind him and they arrest Jesus right there on the spot. All of that took place on Maundy Thursday of Holy Week. And it begs the question, what in the world could this possibly mean for us? How on earth does that change how we operate this week? Is this just an interesting story? Or is there something for us 2,000 years later to take? I'll tell you one thing, man. It really makes me want to punch Judas in the mouth. It makes me want to just kick him in the jejunum, which is a part right here that makes the person throw up. I know some Judes, and I have a Judah, but I don't know anybody that has named their son Judas. His name is synonymous with the word traitor. You see, sometimes as we grow up, we look at people who are doing good, and we try to emulate their behavior. So we see a good boss, and we go, man, if I'm ever going to be the boss, I'm going to try to be like that. We see a good parent, and we say, if I'm ever going to be a parent, I'm going to try to parent like that. And obviously, good examples can help us grow in our own character. But I would also propose that it's not just good behavior that we want to model that helps us grow, but when we see bad behavior modeled, it is a warning. It is is like, I don't want to do that. And so I would propose that we are all growing up as a combination of seeing good that we want to emulate, but bad that we want to avoid. And so when you read the Bible, you can read about Jesus, you can read about other people in the Bible, you can say, man, I want to grow up and be like that. But it's also of significant value to look at a person like Judas and say, I don't want to be like that. And so here I wrote 4 short but important lessons that I learned from Judas. Number 1, Judas refused to change. He refused to change. Man, Judas was there. He was there when blind people were able to see. He was there when a person was lame. He'd never taken a step before. And Jesus said, get up, pick up your mat and walk. And the man just went running around, leaping and praising God. He was there when people who had leprosy were cleansed. Jesus did it right in front of Judas's eyes. But Judas never really changed. Judas was there when Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. And Jesus raised him from the dead. Judas saw this with his own eyes, but when it came down to it, Judas never really changed. He spent 3 years with Jesus, as close as you can possibly be, and he never changed. And so what I see is that it's not enough to see what Jesus does, or hear what Jesus says, or spend time with other people who follow Jesus. At some point, you have to let God change your life. Judas refused to change. He was around Jesus the most, but he never let Jesus change him. And so what I learned from Jesus is I don't want to hang around Jesus and people who love Jesus, but never let it change me. Never let it change my attitude. Never let it change my compassion. Never let it change my gentleness. Never let it change my language. Never let it change my morality. Never let it change my obedience. Never let it change my heart. It's easy to walk in here and go, wow, that was interesting. And just go, doesn't affect me. Walk out, be the exact same person you were when you walked in. At some point, we've got to lay down our pride and say, I am willing to change if Jesus is asking me to change. And Judas never let God change his life. Number 2, Judas never fully surrendered to Jesus. And I want to prove it to you. At the Last Supper, when Jesus said, one of you is going to betray me, every one of them down the line said, Lord, is it me? Lord, is it me? Lord, is it me? 11 times. When it got to number 12, Judas Iscariot himself, he did not say, Lord, is it me? He said, surely you don't mean me, Rabbi. He called him Rabbi and not the Lord. Rabbi is what you call someone if they're your teacher. You see, I don't know that many people who disagree with the fact that Jesus actually lived, and I don't talk to very many people who disagree with most of what Jesus said. I think there's a general consensus. We like Jesus. He liked kids, he liked to help the poor, and he taught good things like kindness and compassion. For the most part, people agree. Jesus, good guy. But there is an indescribable difference between thinking that Jesus was a good example or a good teacher and believing that he is the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings, the Son of God, and the Savior who takes away the sin of the world. There's a big difference there, friends. See, what I'm asking you is, when you encounter Jesus, when you read the Bible, when you hear what Jesus said, when you think about Jesus' life, do you view him, be honest with yourself, as somewhat of an advisor who can speak into parts of your life? Or is he the Lord of your life? Because 11 of the disciples fully surrendered to Jesus, but Judas decided, you know what, I'm going to call him Rabbi instead of Lord. You see, Judas, to his credit, was willing to give Jesus something, but he was not willing to give Jesus everything. That's why it rubbed him the wrong way when that lady came in and poured that perfume on his head. He was okay with Jesus receiving something, but he wasn't okay with Jesus getting everything. You see, this woman was worshiping Jesus with everything that she had, and Judas, he just couldn't get there. Are you willing to give Jesus something? Most of us are. Most of us don't mind if Jesus intervenes in our lives in certain ways. Most of us, if we're being honest, we might view our life a little bit like an orange, where as soon as you peel off the skin, you can start pulling away all the little pieces. And we have these little slices of our life. We've got our work life, our marriage life, our relationship life, our church life, our extended family life. We've got all these different areas of our life, and we pick and choose which slices that we're okay with Jesus influencing. But that's a very Judas way to do it, because Judas was willing to give Jesus something, but not everything. And so I guess I'm asking the question, are you treating Jesus like a good advisor or the Lord of your life? I have done both. I would even venture to say that at times I still can go back and forth where I'm uncomfortable letting God rule over all of my life. I just got to tell you, having experienced both, the joy of the Christian life is found in fully surrendering to Jesus. Number 3, Judas loved money. He loved money, man. When Mary poured out the perfume on Jesus, Judas didn't care about the money that was going to go to the poor. He was only interested in what was coming back to him. And when he went down that 1.5 bumpy dirt road to Caiaphas' house, what was the first question he asked them? How much are you willing to pay me for Jesus? Judas had spent 2 or 3 years living with not very much. I mean, Jesus and these disciples were not filthy rich financially. And a lot of times they had nothing. They would just go from city to city with hoping somebody would take them in. And Judas had had enough. And the lure of financial security was worth betraying his friend. Often when money is involved, years of friendship can evaporate quickly. So I think the question is, for us in response to Judas is truly like, do you love money? Do you love money? And I know that is not one that we quickly raise our hand and go, definitely, that's my problem. Like if I said, hey, do you struggle with pride? A lot of us go, bah, a little bit. Hey, do you care too much about what people think about you? Bah, you selfish sometimes? You got to raise your hand. And we're actually okay with it because most other people are. We're willing to admit that one. Do you love money? Do you love money? You guys know the comedian, I don't know if it was Jeff Foxworthy or Larry the Cable Guy, but he had this whole, set that was, you might be a redneck if. Does anybody remember that at all? Foxworthy. And I watched one last night. I have to read them. If you ever cut your grass and find a car, you might be a redneck. If someone comes to your door mistakenly thinking that you're having a yard sale, you might be a redneck. If you've ever financed a tattoo, you might be a redneck. I thought they were funny. If you cheat on your taxes, you might love money. If you regularly feel anxious about your financial future, you might love money. If you call someone who has a lot of money successful, you might love money. If it's really hard for you to give, you might love money. If you're tempted to compromise your integrity for financial gain, you might love money. If you admire wealthy people for no other reason other than the fact that they're wealthy, you might love money. A couple other questions that pick at this. How do you react? Be honest with yourself. How do you react when you lose money that you didn't expect to lose, or you have to pay a bill you didn't expect to have to pay? What does that do to your heart? And on the flip side, what does it do to your heart when you get money that you didn't expect to get? What would you do if you knew that God was asking you to give something significant away? Jesus said it himself, man. He said, where your treasure is, that's where your heart's at. In other words, you're going to spend the most money on what you love the most. I'm not going to listen to what you're saying. Jesus says, where you put your money, I know that's where your heart's at. That's what you love. I hear people sometimes that go, they say, well, I don't even have very much money, so I can't possibly love it. It's like, well, I don't think that's true. I don't think there's a direct correlation between the amount of money that you have and the amount of love you have for it. Because I have met rich people who hold it open-handedly, who don't seem to love it. And I have met people who've got almost no money that would do anything to get money. And they love it so much. Having money isn't bad, but loving money is the root of all kinds of evil. And Judas loved money. And let that be a warning to you this morning. Here's number 4. I could hardly believe this. I came into this week, I came into the whole series thinking, okay, Maundy, Thursday, it's the Thursday of Holy Week. Certainly, I will either give a message on communion, because that happened at the Last Supper, or we'll give a message on Jesus washing the disciples' feet, because that's just an amazing story. Yeah, how can you skip that? So this week coming in, I thought it's going to be one of those two. And then I read this whole story in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John last Sunday night and Monday morning. I just read them all right through. And there was one verse, one part of the story. I'd never seen it before. I've read this story many times. I've never seen this part of the story before. It jumped off the page. And I tried to shake it. I thought, nah, that can't possibly be it. And then all day Monday, all day Tuesday, it just was impressed upon my heart, this thing that I'm going to read you right here. Jesus is on the Mount of Olives with his disciples. Judas and all those guards with all their lanterns just walked through the Kidron Valley, and they walked up. Judas just kissed Jesus on the cheek, indicating that he is the one that they're supposed to arrest. He said, "Greetings, Rabbi." Do you know what Jesus said? Do you know what Jesus said? Jesus replied, "Do what you came for, friend." I don't think that's the word I would have used. He said, "Do what you came for, friend." I don't even think I can tell you in church what I would have called him. It wouldn't have been friend. And I don't think that Jesus was trying to be nice. I think Jesus was telling the truth. I believe that Jesus was looking past what Judas was doing in that moment, and he was still offering his hand of friendship to Judas. I mean, when he talked to the Pharisees, he called them whitewashed tombs and a brood of vipers. So you know that Jesus has some terminology he can attribute to some people. But in this moment, as Judas is actively betraying him in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus says, "Do what you came for, friend." Proof once again that there's always more grace in Christ than there is sin in us. I just read this story and I couldn't help but be so inspired to want to be more like Jesus and to have compassion like Jesus, because when someone cuts me off when I'm driving, I do not call them friend. I call them an idiot. When someone at the grocery store starts yelling at their kids for really no reason, clearly this is a parent having a bad day, I just think, man, what a jerk. When someone tries to take me for a ride and take advantage of me or make me pay more than I probably should have, I just think, man, what a scumbag. What a piece of work. And what I do is I take someone's very worst moment, a moment that they're probably not proud of and potentially unaware that they're even doing, and I take that and I identify them with a word that would describe them, like jerk or idiot or moron, piece of trash. In other words, that I'm not comfortable to say on this stage. I'm just so quick to judge in those scenarios. And if I zoom back, I just go, man, Jesus in this moment, he calls Judas a friend. I just think to myself, man, what if the person who cut me off, I don't know, what What if he was going somewhere and had to be somewhere, but maybe, I don't know. What if the person that was yelling at their kids in the grocery store was just having a really bad day, and that was the behavior that was modeled for them? They don't really know any different. What if the person who's trying to take me for a ride, make me pay for a little bit more than I should have paid for in the beginning? What if they're just doing everything they possibly can to put food on the table for their family? I'm not trying to excuse bad behavior, but what I am saying is that no one has ever done something to me as bad as Judas did to Jesus, and Jesus still called him friend. He called him friend. He looked past his worst mistake, past his bad behavior, into his heart and extended a hand of friendship. I'm just gonna be honest with you. Right now, I'm just kind of going through something where I just feel like I'm being taken advantage of. Just being honest. I feel like somebody's trying to take me for a ride, and it honestly has grinded my gears for a little while. And man, time hasn't really healed this. Time is kind of making it worse. When I think about this situation or this person, bitterness and resentment begin to well up within me, and I'm not proud of the way that I have thought about this individual person. And let me just tell you that the only antidote, the only way that these feelings come down, just being honest, is the only way I have found that it comes down is if I pray for that person. And I pray for that person's marriage, and I pray for that person's children, and I pray for that person's home, and I ask God to bless that person. It's the only thing that I have found that makes this thing inside of me come down. It's the only way that the blood pressure in me goes down. A couple hours after Judas betrayed Jesus in the garden, he says, "Do what you came for, friend." A couple hours later, there's Roman executioners nailing Jesus' hands to the cross, raising him up, mocking him, spitting on him, beating him. What does Jesus say? "You scoundrels, you murderers." No. He looks down at the people and says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." Just the unbelievable compassion of Jesus in this story is amazing to me, that he still offers his hand of friendship to Judas. I guess the question then is, did Judas receive the friendship offered him? Did Judas receive forgiveness and go to heaven? It's been debated between theologians forever. People that are far smarter than me are on both sides of this. I'd rather say heck or HE double hockey sticks than hell. But here at Three Creeks, we believe that heaven and hell are real places, and belief in Jesus is what makes the difference. And so did Judas go to heaven or did Judas go to hell? I believe that he went to hell. And I want to tell you why I believe that. Because Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record that Jesus said, "It would have been better to have not been born than to be the one who betrays me." Judas did not sail off to Greece in a yacht with his $40,000, with his 30 shekels of silver. He did not live in luxury because he betrayed Jesus. He didn't go on without this affecting his conscience at all. When he hears that Jesus was arrested and that they're going to execute Jesus, it says that Judas was seized with remorse and tried to go back to the priests and return the money. And the priest said, "Sorry about you. What's done is done." And it says that Judas actually threw the money back into the temple. And then he went out and he took his own life. He hung himself. So here's what I would say about Judas, just from what I read in the text. Judas was filled with remorse. He experienced intense regret, but he never repented. And when Judas took his own life, it was his own attempt to pay for his own sins. And that's not how it works. He's saying if he's going to die, well, then so will I. And so in some way, Judas was trying to make up for his own mistakes. It's important to note that I don't believe that Judas is in hell because he stole money off the top when he was the treasurer. I don't believe that Judas is in hell because he betrayed Jesus to Caiaphas and the high priests. And I don't believe that Judas is in hell because he took his own life. Even after all this, Jesus extended his hand of friendship. He offered forgiveness, and Judas felt terrible about it. He was seized with remorse. He had intense regret, but he tried to pay for his own sins. Contrast that with the other disciple, Peter, who on the same night denied Jesus 3 times. Do you remember this story? People came up to Peter the same night. They said, Peter, do you know him? Peter 3 different times says, I've never spent time with Jesus in my life. I don't know what you're talking about. He absolutely abandons Jesus. But after Jesus comes back to life and resurrects from the dead, Jesus and Peter have this reunification, this conversation where Peter repents and asks for forgiveness. And of course, Jesus gives it. All of this to highlight that it's not our mistakes that keep us far from God. It's our unwillingness to admit our mistakes and let Jesus forgive us for them. I actually wonder if Paul had Peter and Judas in mind when he wrote to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 7 that godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation, but worldly sorrow brings death. Godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation, but worldly sorrow brings death. Godly sorrow drives you to Jesus. It drives you to your knees to the point where you say, I am so sorry and I need you to forgive me. And worldly sorrow drives us away from Jesus, where we say, I am so sorry and I don't deserve to be forgiven. And this leads to death. I'll just close with this. Ernest Hemingway, guy that wrote Old Man and the Sea, also wrote a story called The Capital of the World. Maybe you've heard about this. And it's a story about a young man named Paco and his dad. And Paco sinned against his father. And he was so ashamed of what he had done to his dad that he ran away as a teenager. And the father, although offended by the sins of his son, still wanted a relationship with his son and was so sad that his son Paco had run away. And for months, spent time looking all over the country for Paco, his son. And finally, after months of searching for his son to try to forgive him, he thought, I've got one last attempt. And so he took out a full-page advertisement in the city newspaper. And all it said was, Paco, meet me at the Hotel Montana at 12 o'clock noon on Tuesday. All is forgiven. And he put the ad out in the paper, and he just hoped that his son would read the advertisement and take him up on the offer that all would be forgiven. So a couple days later, it's Tuesday, and it's about to be noon, and he pulls up to the Hotel Montana, and he sees all these police cars because the Hotel Montana has been run over by all of these young men. There are 800 men named Paco who have all come to the Hotel Montana at noon because they want their dad to forgive them. And it's a short story, but it's insightful because what it shows is it shows every single person's longing to be forgiven. That every single person at the core of who they are know that they have made mistakes and that they need to be forgiven. And so when forgiveness is actually offered, man, there's something inside of us that just wants to go, yes, I need that. I need it. Friends, listen, by the grace of God, Jesus does not hold our worst moments against us. But even when he's being betrayed in the garden, he says, do what you came for, friend. And so my question to you this morning is not, have you ever done anything wrong? My question to you this morning is, have you ever trusted Jesus to take it all away? Have you ever trusted Jesus to come and wipe all of your sins away? Because the same offer is on the table for you. All is forgiven, but it's something that you have to receive. Could everybody in the room close their eyes for a second? Let me just lead you through a prayer. This might be a prayer you've prayed 100 times before, but maybe this is the first time. It's a prayer for salvation. It's a prayer for forgiveness. It's a prayer to receive the friendship of Jesus. I'll pray it slow enough that if you want to pray it back, you can echo it. You can pray it out loud. You can pray it in your head. You can pray it under your breath. It counts in all the ways. And I invite you to echo this prayer with me, whether it's the first time or the 100th time, to receive the forgiveness of Jesus. Dear Jesus, today I receive it. I receive your offer of friendship. I receive your forgiveness. I don't want to just give you something. I want to give you everything. And I'm willing to change. And I pray this all in Jesus' name. Thanks for watching. To find out more about our church, about when and where we meet, about joining a group, about serving on a team, about giving online, you can find all of it at threecreekschurch.com.